everyone, and welcome to Pets Chats with the APBC. We are the Association of Pet Behaviour Counsellors, and we're here to teach you how to be the best pet owner or behaviourist in the world. I'm your host, Lauren Hewitt-Watt, and I'm joined by Roz Pooley. Hi, Roz.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Oh, it's so lovely to have you on. We were just having a little chat before, just saying it was really nice for us to meet. And Roz, can you introduce yourself? Just a brief little sentence.
Yeah, so I am a clinical animal behaviourist from Bristol. I've been working with dogs for 13 years, and I live with 3 dogs and a long-suffering partner.
And you've just
as most pet behaviourists do, there's usually someone lurking in the back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they all have the same, don't they? Yeah. The partners are just like, oh, we'll just let you get on with it. Yeah. And today we're actually going to be talking about should I castrate my dog? But before we go into that, I just want you, if possible, just because I know there'll be a lot of dog owners watching this, could you differentiate the sort of different terms? Because there's castration, there's neutering, there's spaying. And I know that sometimes it does get a bit confusing as to what it is. So yeah, that'd be great.
Generally, neutering, I would sort of tend to refer to as a generic term for both sexes. Mm-hmm. And then obviously spaying we would refer to for bitches, and castration we refer to for male dogs. Obviously with castration you have two, and even potentially with bitches, but 2 types of castration we see more commonly in male dogs is chemical castration, which is an implant, and then surgical castration as well. So generally when we sort of define neutering, it can be, either spaying or castration. Mm-hmm. Generally, with the term neutering, we would be, what would come to my mind in particular would be surgical. Whereas with castration, obviously, because you've got chemical, that can be temporary as well.
Okay, brilliant. And I think we kind of discussed this before, and I think we want to focus on the male dogs, on the castration, just because I feel like testosterone, it's a good topic to talk about, and I know that it's something that you know a lot about. And are you noticing that more owners are choosing to keep their dogs entire rather than castrate them?
Yeah, I think that it's certainly been a big shift in the past few years. And I think a lot of that has come down to vets reading the recent research. Obviously, the big paper was McGreevy al. In 2018. It took a couple of years, I think, to filter down to the vet practices. And now, especially in Bristol, obviously, I can only really predominantly speak for my area and the vets that I work with, but I see in a lot of, with first-hand conversations with vets when they're referring to me, but also in the medical history notes that I read as part of my behaviour assessment process. I see a lot of vets now recommending to owners to not castrate until they either get a behaviourist opinion if they are doing that for behaviour reasons, and sometimes when the owners aren't asking about castration for behaviour, they just think it's the thing for them to do as responsible owners. I'm seeing in medical histories that vets are saying, actually, we think your dog might be a little bit too anxious, and recommending that they wait a little bit or get a professional opinion. And also, I think there's just, owners have so much access to information, and then, sort of social, mirroring or learning where, there are more entire dogs around. And so it's now becoming more socially acceptable to have an entire dog. I think people have learned that, you can have an entire dog and not breed from them, and you can have an entire dog and have control of them. So the risk of unplanned pregnancies is very low, in my opinion, if you're a responsible owner. So absolutely, I think in the past few years, there's been a huge increase in entire dogs, which is great in many ways, but obviously it's not without its risk of problems.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of those problems, actually, let's go back. In terms of obviously the health, we would leave to the vets, and we would say that's something for you to discuss with your vet. But in terms of behaviour, what might be some behaviour reasons to not castrate your male dog?
I think for me, a lot of the behaviour problems that come with entire dogs can be development phase specific, and with appropriate management and training, then if we protect our dogs from getting into problematic interactions, and we work really hard on their recall and their overall responsiveness to owners, that that those behavior problems can be mitigated with training and patience and management. In terms of, other risks, obviously there's sometimes you can get inter-male competition. That isn't exclusive to two entire dogs. You can get neutered males that might have a problem with entire males. And some entire males do appear to draw more sort of negative feedback from other dogs, perhaps due to how they're entering interactions. Sometimes it's actually got nothing to do with their body language and their behavior. It actually seems to be very much due to potentially their chemical profile, their scent. And so that can be potentially a reason to neuter. If, every time your dog's interacting with another dog, they're being, responded to with aggressive behavior, that it puts the dog at risk of developing a problem behavior. But there's lots more to it than just castration. There's so much background things that, because the stress of the dog may influence its chemical profile. So there's so many things to look at other than going down, an irreversible procedure as the primary intervention, in terms of trying to address that problem behavior.
I would say from experience, I've got a golden retriever. He's a really big male, and he's been entire, and his head is humongous. So you do get a difference in kind of size in them.
Well, don't get me started on head size. My partner,
and everyone goes, "Oh, he's got such a big head. Is he a polar bear? Like, he's massive." But I do find I've had to, particularly in those kind of peak ages, where he's fully mature. I mean, he's 11 now, so he gets it less. But I did find I was having to be very careful with males coming up to neutered males as well, because they just would not like him sometimes. And you do have to protect
how a dog looks. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just sometimes how they naturally hold their tail carriage and the size of their head. Neutered. If you leave dogs to develop naturally, then generally you will see, especially in dogs with higher testosterone levels, that they do seem to have larger skull sizes, and so they look stronger. And they could try to soften their body language as hard as they possibly can, but they can't change fundamentally how they look or how they naturally hold their tail carriage. I mean, they can obviously adjust that. But, it's like with us, we hold ourselves a certain way subconsciously. And it's only until someone says something to us that we might start to change our body language. And by that point for the dog, they've already started to have the, behavior from the other individual that can obviously lead to negative, associations. So, there's many factors that come into it. But when we leave dogs to develop as nature intended, in my personal opinion and experience, I feel that the males and actually the females, they look stronger. They because that's what the hormones are for. If you're a wild golden retriever, you would have to go out there and say to the ladies, "Look at how big and strong I am. I'm the golden retriever for you because your offspring are going to be strong specimens from my strong genes." So it makes sense that these sexual hormones promote very strong bodies. And so as a result, when dogs are perhaps, they look different, whether they're a different breed or that they're neutered early, or perhaps they've got lower levels of testosterone in them as an individual, that those individuals feel insecure just simply through default of, well, you look very strong and I now feel anxious because if there's a problem, I'm at risk of coming out worse. So I'll get in there preemptively.
Yeah, that's what I found. Although I found the ladies love him. So neutered or unneutered, they seem to love him. Like the entire males, they flock around him. So
it's a magnet for senior Jack Russells, funnily enough. Yeah, I have seen many senior Jack Russells cross the meadow with a very confused owner going, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's my dog. He's a total magnet for female senior Jack Russells." But he's, it's actually when I do a lot of social rehabilitation, and my dogs are helper dogs. Obviously we use them very carefully, but historically, before I had an entire male, I would have to go very, very careful about using bitches, about who I would team cases that were a bitch with which dog, because now I put a behavior case bitch with Mohawk, and we have very little work to do because nature just does its thing. And they're like, start fluttering their eyelashes. And he's just like, yeah. But it's great because then that actually helps the owner build confidence that yes, my dog can socialize, and and the dog learns actually this sort of interaction feels good, and we can use that as an approximation towards other dogs. So there's certainly merits to having entire dogs, but they're not without their challenges, especially through adolescence. But it does tend to get better if managed very, very well.
Okay. And sort of coming on to that, what are things, so if owners are watching this, what would you say to them when their dog is coming into adolescence? You're going to keep them entire. What can they do to preempt some of the issues that might be coming up, or to stop them?
I mean, as with any dog, whether they're entire or not, if they're in, generally from 4 months onwards, or 16 weeks, well, it's 4 months, but 4 months onwards, when they start to build their confidence and experiences, where recall training has to up. But in an entire adolescent, but actually not just entire ones, I've seen plenty of young neutered bitches need a lot of recall training. They're going to be very socially motivated. But the entire males, we definitely are going to see a massive increase in that social motivation and because they're seeking information in it more than just for social interaction. They have a different goal in mind, especially if they come across scent and they start to learn what that scent means. So there is some level of innate understanding of this scent feels like it should mean something, but actually that exposure to scent of a bitch in estrus, the more they encounter it, the more likely they learn significance. So we have to learn to read their body language so that we can manage their exposure to the scent. If we don't, want to breed our dogs and we need to keep them under control, we have to learn what they look like when they might be starting to track scent that may lead to roaming. And even if they've got a cracking good recall, it's actually quite difficult to recall a dog off the scent of a bitch in estrus once those bodily processes and the brain processes have started, because procreation is why we eat. So when we're like, oh, we'll just read, if they've got good recall, well, it's not as simple as that. Because a dog, if they are nourished, they're going to put food to the side and be like, well, I've got an opportunity to mate here. So learning body language is really important. But actually, I think what's often overlooked, and something that I coach owners on a lot, is that especially male dogs, but actually it's the same for females too, when they are going through these hormonal changes, we need to be very, very careful about interactions with others, and especially dogs who are going through similar phases, because testosterone doesn't make dogs aggressive by default. It's if a dog has tendencies or traits there, then testosterone potentially might slightly increase those traits. But actually what's going to increase the risk of aggression is another male that is going through the similar sort of risk-taking phase, higher tendency, higher likelihood of a stress response because they're going through adolescence, their heightened activity of the sort of fear center in the brain. So they're going to more quickly go, start to respond over emotionally to situations. And so I always say actually just being very, very careful with especially play interactions.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah.
They can get so competitive so quickly. And it doesn't take much for then, for that to escalate into a negative situation. And it's not just the boys as well, actually, with the girls when they are working through their, especially their first estrus cycle, which can be very, emotional for many of them. If you put them with another bitch that's going through a similar phase, then naturally, if you put two highly emotional, stressed individuals figuring out what life all means together, there's a risk of it going wrong. So during adolescence in particular, I tend to say to owners, you really want to be meeting up with established friends, but those friends should not be, like too similar, especially similar breeds.
Similar size as well, would you say?
Size, similar breeds, similar, just, because the risk is too high for it to go wrong. So you're looking at meeting up with friends that have also different motivations. So, if an adolescent dog just wants to play a lot, actually putting them with dogs that just want to bumble along and sniff is going to help them, get it right,
Yeah.
social interactions at that crucial time. So I think those are the things that are so important. It's learning body language, working very much on recall, taking each day as it comes, not expecting linear progression, and being very aware of how social interactions can escalate, even between firm friends. Mohawk didn't see one of his friends for 6 months because we now meet up with them every weekend. But he was a young border collie, he was entire, and they were a month apart in age. And as soon as we started to see that there was a bit of prickliness, and there was one moment where it looked, it did escalate a little. And the moment it escalated, we went, right, they don't see each other for 6 months, which is a shame because we enjoyed our walks together. But I would rather that we could walk together for the rest of our lives. And now we go for walks every weekend, and we carefully reintroduced them and they were fine.
That's really good to know, because I think a lot of people panic that if you stop those interactions, you're never going to get that back. But actually, what you've said from a professional, you're saying actually it's better to not have those bad interactions and restart them.
We have to remember, like, the peak of testosterone is usually in dogs between 12 and 15 months. So that's when it's absolutely at its highest. And it's not even that once that peak is over, we're out of the sort of choppy waters, because don't forget the learning that goes on during that phase could so easily carry on for a few months after. So really what we're looking at is recognizing, okay, we're entering that peak. And, we need to make sure that, during that peak that we're protecting them, but rather than being like, 16 months, let's just get back to it, that we carefully ease them back into it and help just making sure that we know that they are, sort of ready to learn, to really take on the information that we want them to learn again, as well. So sometimes we have to take our foot off the gas and do a little more management than training. And just be a little bit patient, and I've done this with my dog, and I have every confidence that it works, because my dog is now a very he's pretty much an adult, and he's still entire, and he's a really cracking individual. So
okay, are there any dogs that you think can't deal very well with the testosterone, and that you've seen in your life where you think actually neutering for this dog is going to be better for their welfare?
Okay. It's a really good question, and there's always variation. We have to remember is that the most of the entire pet dogs out there aren't breeding. So a lot of people are doing it because they've realized that actually it might be healthier behaviorally and physically for the dog to stay entire. But the reality is that, by not allowing them to breed, for some individuals, that can create huge frustration. And they might not even particularly know what they're frustrated about if they're inexperienced, but they have this internal physiological frustration where their body is just cannot find that homeostasis. And, we see quite a lot in working breeds where if they are, already quite easily stimulated, and more prone to stress because they're more easily stimulated, harder to regulate, so regulating obviously the stress response helps regulate hormones. But if the individual has a higher tendency for stress, then that means that the hormones can kind of get shifted off kilter too. And also you're going to get some individuals that have higher levels of hormones than others. And so I think sometimes you just do see a dog where you're like, you are not happy as an entire dog, because there's no outlet. If you're not breeding, there's no outlet. And even if there was, that might not be the right thing, because once they know something's available, that can change their behavior.
I was going to ask that question actually, because some people say, should I let my dog breed once to get it out of them, and will they be okay? But what would you think?
I mean, to me, it's that if we should only be breeding for one reason, and that is that the individual has absolutely outstanding genetics, behaviorally and physically, to offer the dog population. There is literally no other reason to breed a dog. If you show a male dog, what the bit what in estrus
what it means,
what the means, and what behavior is available, and they get that action, and it's a massive reinforcer. Then they become more experienced, the scent can become more salient to them, and then potentially that might affect their behavior. Actually sometimes anecdotally, through speaking to people I know who have bred their dogs, I will say from a pedigree point perspective, some people might not think that matters, but where they are selecting for temperament and good health, that they have found that their dogs are become a little bit more edgy and a little bit more competitive when they encounter other bitches that are in season. And actually I would say for Mohawk at the moment, we definitely encountered some in-season bitch over a couple of days ago and today. And he actually goes a little bit more withdrawn at home, not necessarily, not hugely so, but he goes a little bit more reclusive. He can be a little less affectionate. It goes just a bit more serious. For some dogs, they lose their appetite. Some dogs get really frustrated in that they might try and get out of the house, or they can't settle, especially if there's a bitch around their local area that's so I think if we introduce that give them clarity on what that information is. For some dogs it can be resigning into even more frustration. And for bitches, obviously I know we're really focusing on boys, but it's important to recognize that breeding sort of raising a litter, or gestation in itself and raising a litter is incredibly taxing. And I don't think quite a lot of people realize it's risky from a health perspective, but also it's very physiologically taxing, and that actually ages dogs. Obviously if they've got real optimum health, you can mitigate that aging, but I have seen some dogs really prematurely age for being bred quite young. Again, it's anecdotal, isn't it? But it makes sense.
I can think of ones that I've known of, and they do seem to age.
It's tiring. You have to chat to any pregnant friends to know
exactly.
Being pregnant and raising a baby takes it out of them. And obviously, we've got the lifestyle choice control to be like, let's eat well, let's exercise. I need to rest. But actually for some dogs, their owners might not, know how to achieve that optimum health in their dog. But also actually in some dogs, the genetics of that dog may make optimum health very difficult to achieve. So we should only be breeding if we absolutely, I say have to, but where for very good reason. And it's just not necessary to do to satisfy a dog. Because actually I think we can cause more frustration.
No, that's really good to know, because I know that's the question that people have. And we'll start to wrap it up. I've got one more question that I've had in the past. It's quite an odd question, but is there any interaction between testosterone in male humans and male dogs? Because you hear about people say, I don't know, is there anything in that? Or is it just completely kind of old wives' tale?
I had someone ask a question similar recently. Possibly because I did a webinar on hormones. Someone asked me a question that was quite similar about if you have two individual dogs that are going through a testosterone surge, similar time. I think it's one of those, I don't know the answer for sure, but when I try and look at it in terms of what I do know about stress and what I do know about the relationship between the HPA axis, so the stress axis, and the hormonal axis, there is a relationship between the two. And we know that dogs can smell a heck of a lot. It would make sense that they can smell hormones, because hormones are in a way are pheromone, signals. As well as changing the body, they're going to have an impact on our scent, aren't they? So I think that if a male in the household, well, they're a male with testosterone. So if there's a male with testosterone, the dog's going to be aware that, not only from phenotype, but from probably sense that you are a male. And that I imagine if there was really high testosterone in a male human, or let's just say a dog, to make it sort of a broad way of applying this, that might potentially then affect their behavior as an individual, but also actually if due to the sense and the perception of those levels, perhaps it makes the dog more stressed. Which may affect their behavior. So that's the way I kind of looked at it, is that it's actually probably a bit more intertwined as you've got high testosterone, therefore that makes me produce, I think it's much more complicated than that, because the body's always trying to find homeostasis. And we know that so many things, such as, things in the environment, from even what we eat, can affect our hormones. So I think that it would make sense that, that if there was all of a sudden someone in the environment that had very high hormones, that might have an impact on a dog emotionally or even potentially physiologically. And actually, we can very rarely separate the two.
Yeah, I suppose it's the same as when people say when they get pregnant, their dog responds differently to them. And again, it's very nuanced. It's not to say it's this or it's this. It's probably all the different things that are going on.
Yeah, like for instance, high levels of estrogen generally can sort of increase anxiety, increase aggression in many different species. And so then, is there an association there? When I smell this at certain levels, I expect this, this sort of potentially. So we just don't. There's so many.
So interesting.
That there might be a more specific answer out there that I've just not accessed.
Yeah. No, it's. Sorry to fire you. Actually, a quite difficult question, but it's just one that I've heard people say, could that be why my dog's responding worse to my husband or whoever than it is to me? But there's probably so much more in it.
I've had cases where the male in the household seems to be doing everything right. The dog hasn't got a history, such as rescue shelter, where they've been raised by, predominantly women, and where the dog seems to not enjoy the company of the male so much. So it could just then be that, I associate the scent of testosterone with distancing myself, possibly. From a competition point of view, in terms of like, if you think of it from an ethology perspective, if there were lots of males in an area, there's going to be increased likelihood of conflict if a bitching season were to come along. So it kind of makes sense that for some dogs, they might be a bit more aware that, that could potentially be a bit of a problem for me. So I might distance myself or try to repel. Maybe it's very nuanced.
Really interesting. But no, thank you so much for answering that. So I think we'll start to wrap that up now. But first of all, where can people find you if they want to come and work with you?
So you can find me online. My website is themuttieprofessor.co.uk. I am obviously on Facebook as well, although all of our inquiries we do channel to email, which can be found through our website. But you can find me on Facebook. I do lots of posts about these sort of things, and I do lots of webinars. And as you can tell, I can talk about testicles until the cows come back.
And it's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. And I hope everyone has enjoyed watching, and we will see you in the next one.